Before I introduce our speaker, I guess I should tell you who I am because you don't know. I'm Jacob Trop. I'm Associate Professor of History. I teach African history. I'm also currently the Director of the African Studies major and the African Studies minor here at Middlebury. After 1:30, there's going to be a short break, and then the Career Services Office is going to take over, and there's going to be a career conversation between Phil and a number of students, which will last about 40 minutes. And I know a number of students signed up for this already. For those of you that just are hearing about this now or are available, you're more than welcome to stay for that conversation as well. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Phil Oldham. Phil is currently based in Accra, Ghana, where he works for the organization Mercy Corps as Regional Director for West and Central Africa. His work involves managing various development and relief programs in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, the Central African Republic, and Liberia and Niger. Phil has worked in the field of international relief and development for over 15 years and has previously served in Russia, Croatia, Bosnia, Albania, Eritrea, and the DRC. So maybe we can have him back sometime to talk about the Balkans as well. And of course, he's a Middlebury alum, class of 1990, where you got a BA in Soviet Studies. Yes? Okay. So it really all started here. Plus, on a personal note, I've gotten to know Phil socially a little bit over the last couple of years, and his daughter throws a mean 8-year-old butterfly birthday party. So I just thought you should know that. Phil's presentation today is entitled Finding a Way Forward, Options for Ending the Conflict in Eastern DRC or the Democratic Republic of Congo. For those of you following international news over the last week or so in particular, this region that he'll be talking about, the Eastern DRC, has recently exploded again. I'm sure you'll talk about this and there'll be time to ask and answer questions about this, but it's a very timely topic, and we had set this up before all this exploded. But there have been hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of people who were already displaced, being displaced yet again, lots of violence in the region. So I think it'll be very interesting to hear about this. So let's cut to the chase. Please help me welcome Phil Oldham.
Thank you. So let me start by learning just a little bit about you all. How many of you have spent significant time in Africa? Okay. How about Congo? Okay. Where? Okay, great. So I've only been really living and working in Africa for 3 years. As you heard, I have a lot of experience in the Balkans, and Kevin Moss was my professor when I was an undergraduate here and taught me a lot of good Russian, which I don't use very much anymore. But it's a complicated situation, and as Jacob was mentioning in Congo, we set this up and I entitled it kind of The Way Forward in Congo, and just in the last 4 or 5 days we've taken several huge steps backwards. And I was just on the phone this morning with our director in Goma, and I said, what do I say today? And he said, I don't know. So, I'm not sure that the title is appropriate anymore in terms of finding a way forward. I'm not sure anybody has a good answer to that question, but maybe we can still talk about some possible options. I'll just give a little bit of a situational overview on Congo, and then I can show you some pictures of our work, and then maybe talk a little bit about the current conflict and what's going on and what might be coming next. So this relates to Congo, which is a country. I should have put a map in, but I plagiarized this from another presentation and just kind of cut and pasted a little bit. But Congo is about 65 million people, and it's the size of the United States east of the Mississippi, more or less. So it's huge. And over 70% of the population is living on less than $1 a day. The youth bulge is something that's happening globally right now, particularly in the Middle East and Africa, though, where 50% of the population is under 18 years of age, which creates a staggering challenge for the educational system and for job creation. And a lot of the problems in Congo and in other parts of Africa are that militant extremist militia groups are one of the only good paying jobs when you become not out of school necessarily, but when you reach adulthood and you're looking for financial options for you and the ability to start a family. Joining one of these militias is one of the few options in some places. So that's a real challenge as well. I think Somalia is number 1 on the fragile states, but DRC is number 2. There are numerous militia groups, and I'll show a map actually of the eastern Congo in a little bit to give you an idea of kind of how the lines of conflict look. Climate change is something that people in Congo don't feel very much because it's such a fertile jungle area, but we feel it because deforestation in Congo is a significant issue for the rest of the globe because the Congo River Basin is one of the largest carbon sinks in the world. So all those forests are soaking up carbon, and every day they're cut down. As I say, that doesn't really mean there's no more firewood in Congo, as you might find in Niger, where the deforestation is really significant. But as I say, it has global implications. Urbanization, Kinshasa is about 12 million now, which is just huge, both as a percentage of the overall population and a city of 12 million where an extremely small percentage have access to potable water, sewage, electricity, and yet people keep coming and coming. The rural areas are, it's hard to keep people in the rural areas. The lifestyle is more difficult in the urban areas when you don't have services, and yet that's where the draw is because everybody thinks that their future lies in the urban areas. So it's not only Kinshasa, Lubumbashi is growing rapidly as well. HIV/AIDS, you could say that's low, you could say that's high. It's extremely high, in fact, especially when you take it as a percentage of 65 million people, and the absolute number of people living with HIV/AIDS in Congo is, I believe, second in Africa. But compared to places like Zimbabwe, the rate is not high, but as I say, it's still a huge issue. So this is a little bit of history. I won't go too long into this. It was originally the Congo Free State, and that was when it was owned personally by King Leopold of Belgium. It was not a colony, as many of the other parts of Africa were. It was his own personal estate. He never went there, but he certainly abused it and exploited it heavily. It did become a Belgian colony in 1906 and was that way until independence in 1960. If you're looking for a good read, I haven't read it, but I've read several reviews of a book called Chief of Station. Has anybody heard of that? It's about it's written by the CIA station chief in Kinshasa at the time of independence when Lumumba was there, which I always remember because our university in Moscow was that we studied at was just around the corner from the Lumumba University in Moscow, where a lot of African students came to study. But it's about when the CIA station chief actually received instructions from Washington to assassinate Lumumba, and he was sent the drugs to poison him. And his efforts to his rationale, trying to rationalize his need to assassinate Lumumba, and then, as I say, being given the drugs and looking for a way to deliver them, and ultimately not succeeding because it was the Belgians that prompted his own military or bodyguards to assassinate him. But it's still a fascinating look at both our own government's policies and as well as this man's dilemma with the instructions from Washington to assassinate Lumumba. Mobutu was the man in Congo for a long time until the Kabila the First, Laurent Desire Kabila, was marched in with a backing army from Rwanda and deposed Mobutu. He was assassinated relatively quickly, and his son was installed and has since been democratically elected. Democratically, the elections were judged relatively free and fair, but he, and interestingly, his opponent in that election, Bemba, Charles Bemba, is now in The Hague on war crimes charges for his atrocities in the Central African Republic. The Kabila administration has, to the extent you might say that he is a man of integrity who would like to do the right thing for his country, he's proven rather ineffective both in dealing with the conflict in the East or in making substantial improvements in the quality of life with things like water and electricity or education. I guess there's some extra. There's Leopold, there's the Congo. There's Mobutu with the leopard skin hat. And there's Kabila. And there's the current president, his son. In the East, very unstable security, weak to no governance, and widespread corruption. Mismanagement of natural resources. There's tremendous mineral wealth, also forest wealth. The mineral wealth is critical to the well-being of all the world, in that there's some very rare minerals, including coltan. Are you familiar with coltan? Yeah. Pardon? It's used in every cell phone in the world, too. So if all of you've got cell phones, it's quite possible that the coltan that makes it run, that's one of the critical elements, is coming from the Congo, and it's fueling the conflict in the East. The lack of basic infrastructure. You can't drive from the east to the west of the country. It's impossible. There are no passable roads. You're faced with the inability to even drive across the country, which makes logistics very challenging. So this is a map of the conflict in the east. Let's see. So Lake Kivu and Goma is down here. This is where our office is, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. But you can see the patchwork. I jokingly say that I'm going to cut this up and take it home as a jigsaw puzzle for my kids. But you can see the multiple lines of conflict that we have, the multiple different armed groups, and how this is very small area here too. All the way up to Lake Edward is I don't think there's a scale on here, but it's let's see, it's about a 3 or 4 hour drive between the two lakes here, and yet you've got to cross multiple lines. It's interesting that the conflict has flared up again in the last few days because the status quo, there were a lot of vested interests in the status quo, benefited everyone in that because of the smuggling of mineral resources. And so people would fight a little, smuggle a little, fight a little, smuggle a little, but major fighting disrupts the smuggling, and that disrupts the money. And there's a lot of the conflict is being driven by control of land, money, and natural resource exploitation. So a major military assault does disrupt that. And so there's questions as to why this is happening now. And again, there are no really clear answers yet. But after a status quo of a year or two where there hadn't been that many major offensives, why this is happening. But so the National Army in the past few days has proven unable to stop the advance of the rebel groups towards Goma, and has actually gone on the rampage in Goma. I don't know, there's been some articles in the New York Times about the behavior of the Army, which is not the first time that this has happened. They tend to feel that they're embarrassed by their defeat and tend to take it out on the local population, often with rapes, theft. We had one vehicle taken by the Army itself. The foreign influence, just maybe a little history of the conflict, since I'm getting towards that here. It really still stems from the Rwandan genocide in 1994, when the Hutu perpetrators of the genocide fled into the bush in Congo. And the main belligerent right now in Congo, the one who's been assaulting and besieging Goma in the past few days, is Laurent Nkunda. And he is a Congolese Tutsi who claims that his raison d'etre is for the protection of the Congolese Tutsi minority from the Hutu Rwandan genocidaires, those who perpetrated the genocide. So now, 14 years later, we're still seeing what is largely the result of the unsolved issue of war criminals from the Rwandan genocide, which is part of the reason it's so intractable, because the ultimate solution is to bring to justice the genocidaires that are hiding out. They certainly don't want to go back to Rwanda, and yet they are causing innumerable problems in Congo. And both the UN, which is MONUC, is unable, as is the government, unable to catch them. So this is why General Laurent Nkunda has taken matters into his own hands and has organized a self-defense force to protect the Tutsi minority and is fighting the FDLR, which is the Force Démocratique pour la Libération du Rwanda. There's a lack of political will, partly because, again, the country is so large and so ungovernable in some ways. There's a lack of military capacity. Even if there were the political will, the Congolese army is very poorly equipped, very poorly trained, very poorly commanded. So it's very hard to see. There's been increased political pressure from the international community now, but that certainly has happened in the past and doesn't, at least initially, appear to be having any impact on what's going on right now. Weak governance and widespread corruption. Mistrust between the East and the West, that's not globally, that's within Congo. Even Kabila comes from the East. He was raised in Tanzania in an English-speaking environment. He does not speak Lingala or French. He's learning, but when you get to Kinshasa and you want to be president and you don't speak, that would be like ending up in Washington, not speaking English. You probably wouldn't go over very well, and it doesn't. It makes him very unpopular to begin with, but it also limits his effectiveness. The tradition of the big chief is very much an issue in society, and I kind of link it back to my own Soviet experiences where the concept of a vibrant civil society and having a voice in government is not ingrained into the populace the way it would be in America. And so there's not an expectation on a part of the population that they will, as I say, have a voice to a large extent, and that there are those people in power who are in power because that's the way the system works, and they're not to be questioned. So that also, from a civil society perspective, makes it very difficult to bring about change in the structure. The judicial system is extremely corrupt, and there is near total impunity. There has just been some increased attempts to bring to justice some of those perpetrating the gender-based violence, but in this conflict more than anywhere else we've seen in the world, rape as a tool of war and as a tool of controlling the population has emerged, and it's kind of gone beyond what you might have seen in the genocide or in other places, because it's out of control now, and it's not even seen as wrong in many places. It's just the way men behave and the way they've been brought up, the way they've seen, and that comes from being raised as a part of a generation of militarized youth. And your sense of right and wrong has now been kind of swept away, and you don't even recognize what you're doing. Unlike in, say, the genocide in Rwanda, where it was an active tool of the Hutu genocidaires to rape and humiliate the Tutsis, but there, as I say, there wasn't the loss of sense of right and wrong. That was a tool of the war. Mismanagement of natural resources. Again, the mining sector is very unregulated, and that is a big root cause of the conflicts. The influence of foreign entities and proxy militias. You still have very unclear what Rwanda is actually doing, whether they are funding Nkunda, who is the Tutsi trying to root out the genocidaires, whether they're funding him, arming him. They, of course, deny this, but their troops are very active along the border. There have been reports in the last couple of days of seeing uniformed Rwandans inside of Congo. And yet, it's, as I say, very hard to know exactly what Rwanda is doing. Uganda is also in the mix. The Lord's Resistance Army is kind of hides out in Congo when they need a break from their war in Uganda. Uganda is also being brought into it more and more because they've just discovered oil in Lake Edward, which is the northern lake on the map I showed you. So now that there's oil, the undemarcated border along the lake that didn't really mean anything now is important. And so there have been some military skirmishes with the Ugandan army up in the north. And then you have the overlap of the mining sector with environmentally important geographic areas, such as the gorillas. The mountain gorillas are fewer and fewer in number, unlike in Rwanda, where they're well protected and very much an ingrained part of the growing tourism there, and the marketing, and the government is very conscious of that natural resource. Here, they're not well protected, they're not valued, and they're being squeezed out by the conflict. So the effect on traditional livelihoods, we see this in other places around the continent too, but the mining can be attractive, and this comes back to sometimes even the urbanization, and you're drawing into the peri-urban areas where there's mining and there's day labor, as opposed to agriculture, where you kind of plant and you wait all year for that one crop that sustains your family from a food perspective as well as a cash perspective. The mines pay on a daily basis, so you still may only earn $1 a day, but at least you can be sure that you're going to get that $1 a day. And if you get that $1 a day for the next few months and then you're displaced, at least you have that in your pocket. If you're displaced before your harvest comes in, when you're a farmer, then you've lost everything. So the mines are an attractive source of income and labor for people for that reason, but that does, as I say, fuel the conflict and take people away from traditional livelihoods. Our vehicle got stuck in that mess. That's a good example of a Congolese road. 2% of the roads are paved, no land routes between major cities, unreliable air transportation. I don't know if you've seen any of the multiple crashes, but we do not fly on Congolese Airlines as of the last few months. And now to get from Kinshasa to Goma, if we're unable to get on the United Nations flight, which is an NGO, we're often not able to. We have to fly to Nairobi on Kenya Airways, fly back to Kigali, and then drive in. So it's a 2-day process to get to what should be a 3-hour flight. That's just one of the pictures. I'll switch to some pictures here in a minute, but that's the volcano that erupted a few years ago that really dominates the whole landscape there. It's incredibly beautiful, and you can now, it is safe enough to hike to the top again. They had to close the hiking route up there because of the military activity, and probably have again in the last week or so, but it's got the potential to be a real tourist draw. It's one of the few volcanoes in the world that has an open, visible lava lake. So when you get up to the crater edge there, you can look down several thousand feet and see this huge, bubbling, active lava lake. So let me move to a couple of pictures now. So that's another view of the volcano. This is Lake Kivu. It's very beautiful. Again, it's just an anecdote about it. It's one of the few lakes that has a lot of suppressed methane gas in it, and because it's tropical, unlike the Great Lakes, where this is a natural phenomenon here in the United States, or Lake Champlain, where the water on the surface gets cooled in the wintertime and sinks to the bottom, and so the water at the bottom that contains the pressurized methane flows to the top, and the methane is released harmlessly. Here, because there's no climate difference and the water temperature is is the same throughout the year, the methane builds and builds, and this has happened in Cameroon once, because there's a few other lakes in the world, but the lake can what's called turn over. Once the methane concentration is too great, it will spontaneously rise up. And what happens then when the methane all reaches the surface is that because methane is heavier than oxygen, it displaces the oxygen up into the upper atmosphere, and all animal life dies. And there have been 1,500 people that were killed in Cameroon when this happened on a much smaller lake. This one has the potential to kill millions of people if that ever did happen. And that could be triggered by a seismic event, which this is a very seismic area, as the volcano shows. So it's, there are ways to vent it. In Cameroon now they put in vents that will allow the methane to escape upward. But this is much too big of a lake to do that. And so it's kind of impossible to know when this thing might turn over, either through an earthquake or through the thousands of years of building methane, and kill literally millions of people. So that's not something a lot of people are focused on right now. But also it's interesting as a source of power, and the brewery in Rwanda used to have a a plant sitting out on a platform in the island, in the lake, that would draw the methane up and then convert it to electricity. And they've just started that again. That's not enough to lessen the concentration overall, but it's a huge potential source of electricity for the region, in fact. There's a family out for a drive, and the lava fields. I just wanted to give you a sense. I mean, the lava flowed right through downtown Goma, a city of 1 million people, and the lava really destroyed the entire city about 5 years ago when it erupted. And people came back and built right back on their land in the downtown. But this is kind of what they're building on. I don't have good pictures of the downtown area, but these are just some of the. So one of the things that we do is we provide potable water to over 80,000 people every day in the displaced camps. This is a water treatment facility that we've built. And we did that by damming a little stream. We dammed it, unfortunately, because the pump that we could find could only push water out. So it couldn't suck water in, which means we had to get the pump below the water level. So we had to dam this and set the pump down in the there. And now, so we pump the water from the river up into one of these tanks where it's filtered, and then into another tank where it's chlorinated, and then we pump it onto trucks. And I'll show you where we take it. But this is an idea of just the camps that have sprung up. This is me getting typhoid. Which I've done a couple of times, and you walk around the camps and all the kids want to hold your hand and walk with you, and they have a lot of typhoid in the camps, and you're holding hands, and I'm trying to always be really good about washing my hands, but basically you kind of just wipe your nose once after you've been holding hands with these kids, and so I have gotten typhoid the last 2 times I've gone. But more shots of the camps. There's Danton, one of our team members there. This is dinner. There is a World Food Program, food distribution. They've had to cut back dramatically because of shortages in their own pipeline, and it's far inadequate to sustain people. These people, this is cassava leaves, which they're pounding. It creates huge tensions because it's obviously not their cassava plants because they're in a displaced persons camp. So where did they get the cassava leaves? Well, they went into somebody else's field and stole them. So when you get 100,000 extra people living in your next door to you, it creates huge tension over firewood, access to agricultural land, access to food, access to water. Conversely, as difficult as it is for people in the camps, now that we've set up this great water treatment system, the people in the camps are getting cleaner water than the people in the villages. So there you have the reverse, where the people in the villages want what the displaced people have, which is clean drinking water. So it creates huge problems. That's definitely something we have to work on. I have a couple of shots of just the crowds of the kids because it just kind of emphasizes that fact that 50% of Congolese are under the age of 18. So after we purify the water, we load it into trucks, and we'll take it to a water bladder and pump it into the water bladder. And from the bladder, it comes down to the tap stand here, where there are 6 or 8 taps, and people can fill their buckets. Those are the more traditional houses in the area that people would normally be living in if they weren't in the camps. But this is a camp again. You can see that they weren't well sited, and that we've had a few fires in the camps, and you can imagine what a fire will do when the huts are that close together. Why they weren't sited better is a variety of factors. Some of these were spontaneous because the fighting broke out and people displaced, and they self-located where they could find land, and then the international community came in afterwards and started providing assistance and helping them, but they were already established there. There's also a huge challenge to find land because the land is all owned, so it's kind of, could we set up a refugee camp in your backyard? Well, that's where I grow my food and that's where I live, and so you end up negotiating with the communities to find available space, and obviously the prime land is not made available by host communities, so they end up being squashed in and into the worst land. Just a couple more shots. This one is on a hill, which makes it even worse because it rains. It rains about 250 days a year there, And so the people at the bottom of the hill are obviously getting washed out on a regular basis from all the rain. The disease that creates huge problems in containing diseases such as cholera. And just another shot of the refugee camp. Very beautiful scenery, but just a miserable existence right now for these people. There's the tap stand, so people coming to get water. Another one. You can see the extent of the just how far back the camp goes. There it's raining, and again, it's just cold and wet and raining all the time, and there's just no place to go. This is one. This is a different place, but I put it out here just because you can see that this is all built out on volcanic lava. And most of these kids are walking around barefoot on open lava that I can barely walk on it with my shoes. And to see these little kids out there walking around on the lava fields is just incredible. The green building is latrines, and we've built hundreds and hundreds of those in the camps. In addition to water, we also do hygiene promotion, which is helping to keep down the cholera by getting people to wash their hands after they use the latrine and keeping the latrines clean and chlorinated. I put that one in last. Well, I was going to put it in last, but it's now I got one more. But just to say that you do see smiles out there, which is incredible, just given the lifestyle that these people are living right now. But the kids, they find a way to be happy, which is incredible. This I just got this one this morning from our team out there. And this is one of the improved stoves, fuel-efficient stoves, which we're teaching people how to construct. Normally you use the old 3-rock stove. You just get 3 rocks and put the pot in the middle, but that obviously lets the heat dissipate quite quickly and inefficiently, whereas this will reduce wood consumption, which has some climate change impacts, and we're actually looking to get some carbon credits funding for reducing wood consumption. But it's also a huge issue around personal safety and reducing gender-based violence, because a lot of the gender-based violence happens when the women go out into the forest to forage wood. So the more fuel efficient your stove is, the less time you need to spend gathering wood in vulnerable situations. So that was about all I wanted to present. I'm happy now to kind of take some questions about this, about other things, and open it up. So, yes.
I actually have 2 questions. One is, if 50% of our population is under 18, who is taking care of all these kids? How does that structure work
In the camps? It's very collective, and the kids also just run around. I mean, there's no schools. I mean, the camps have not been up and running and established well enough that there's an educational setting yet. There are some kid-friendly spaces which Save the Children is organizing, but those are they're voluntary, and the kids. So they're all over the campus, and the young kids are taking care of the younger kids. I mean, at one point I saw some of the actual displacement happening, and I was in Goma, and you could see the people walking down the roads that had just been displaced. And if you're 5 years old, you're carrying the household goods. If you're 4 years old, you're carrying the 2-year-old. And literally, you've got the 4 and 5-year-olds with the younger kids strapped to their backs, or a cook set on their head. So they're very much participating. They have to, but the children are not taken care of in any way, shape, or form collectively. So, yeah, go ahead. Second question. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the collaboration with other humanitarian relief workers, the UN,
Sure. Well, I'll give 2 seconds on Mercy Corps. I didn't want this to be an advertisement for Mercy Corps, but we're based in Portland, Oregon. We're in about 35 countries around the world, and we have an annual budget of a little over $300 million. In Goma, we've been there about a little over a year now, and we've grown our program to about $5 to $7 million annual budget, and we have a staff of 30 to 40 spread over 4 offices. And we work very closely with the United Nations, particularly UNICEF, which is funding a lot of the water programming that we're doing, UNHCR, which is funding the fuel-efficient stove programs, OFDA, the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, which is part of the U.S. government, part of USAID, is also funding us for some water activities in a different part of the province. And there are daily coordination meetings. There's a water and sanitation coordination meeting every once a week, and then there's a health coordination meeting once a week. That's somebody like so UNICEF is the leader of the water cluster. So they'll convene a meeting weekly, and we'll all decide who's doing what where. And then there's another one for health. There's another one for food and nutrition. There's another one for children and educational issues. So it's very well coordinated. It's unfortunately something that's done in a lot of different countries because this happens all the time. So that doesn't mean there's not what I would say is a healthy competition between the NGOs because there's less so in the emergency settings where we really all pitch in and recognize the strengths and capacities of each other. And but in the development context, which we also have a couple of development programs that are operating in this environment. We have a program that's going to provide potable water, piped potable water to over a couple of 100,000 people in the city of Goma itself. And so that's an urban development program that we're hoping won't get derailed by this. But we're able to do some development work at the same time as we're responding to the crisis. I think just to add another little thing about the country is to remember that North Kivu, where the conflict is happening, is about 2 million people and a very small geographic part. So you've got a huge country with 65 million people. And this is front page news, and it's a huge issue internationally and in the country, but it's very geographically limited, and the number of people ultimately impacted as a percentage of the whole was relatively small. So,
how does Mexico decide if it's going to go into a country and start a new program, as opposed to, I guess, take resources and put them into programs that are already existing?
Mm-hmm.
Or does the funding mostly come, here's funding for a program in Congo?
We focus on transitional environments, and particularly trying to push forward that developmental programming in transitional environments. So in Liberia, we're working to restart cocoa farming in post-conflict Liberia. How do we decide where to go in? Somewhat, sometimes it's driven by the funding. And in Congo, we went in to respond to the emergency, because there was a new influx of fighting and there was a lack of capacity in the existing NGO community to respond to all the needs, and that created, as emergencies often do, created an opportunity for us to begin programming. We've just opened a program in Myanmar following the cyclone. We're big responders to the earthquake in China. About 6 or 8 months ago. So sometimes it's driven by that. Other times, as in Liberia, we opened up a program when we felt like we had value added in terms of our approach to community development, and we were a new player there, but we were able to come in a development setting and talk to the U.S. government about our approach to community development that they valued and funded us. So sometimes it's the funding, sometimes it's the emergency and operational, humanitarian imperative. So. Mm-hmm. Well, that gets to kind of, again, the title of the presentation, which I really, to say, I have trouble answering what's next or where we go. But ultimately, it certainly would be to return them to their original communities under a stable government and a peaceful environment. That is not on the foreseeable horizon. But that would certainly, as a policy matter, be the approach of the international community and the Congolese government, is to create the space for them to go back into their communities. Right now, I don't see any way that they're going to go back. That sometimes even gets driven by things like the agricultural season. So if there were peace now, they couldn't go back until the beginning of the next planting season, and that would need help when they get back to get through until the first harvest and rebuild a lot of the infrastructure. So it's a very complicated issue. But just a little bit more on that. I mean, there's some suspicion that Nkunda is even has designs on Kinshasa and the presidency or a greater role and power in government in the whole country by flexing his muscle and showing that he could have taken Goma militarily, but didn't really want to occupy a city of 1 million because that gets messy. He's increased his negotiating power with the government. The government to date has said they will absolutely not negotiate with him. He is a rebel. He is a warlord. He is a criminal. They brought in 500 Angolan troops to try and add to their own army. This has been done before. The Angolans will be hopefully better disciplined, but they'll certainly be better armed and better trained than the Congolese army. And mercenary-esque, and whether they're able to finally get at Nkunda or not is unclear. But the government is not coming to the negotiating table yet, and it may take. We think it's going to get worse again before it gets better. We think Nkunda will flex his muscles again if he doesn't get what he wants in terms of the opportunity to negotiate and increase power. Yeah, well, part of that is that the government doesn't really control Eastern Congo in any way, shape, or form. I mean, the rebel groups control large swaths of the mineral-rich territory, so they have been more strategic in Lubumbashi and in Katanga, and they've invalidated a lot of the old mining concessions, which they thought were corruptly let. So there is an attempt to bring some transparency there. The influence of the Chinese throughout Africa is very apparent, and you look at who's bringing in the money and who's building what, and it's very apparent they're huge players in the development of Africa, and that has a lot of positives, and there are many who would say it has a lot of negatives too. In Congo, it's at least in Kivu, it's less evident because it's an active conflict zone where the Chinese are not readily investing because it's just too volatile right now, as opposed to Katanga where it's more possible. So. As I say, the whole involvement, I see the Chinese very heavily investing in Liberia. We see it in Niger. So they're everywhere, and they're bringing lots of new money. And yet, certainly, the criticism in Darfur is that they're not being very equitable or just investors. Well, as I say, the Army took our car, so, but, the water, the primary resource that we're providing is water. So do the fighters drink our water? I'm sure they do, because, it's for the IDPs and it's in the camps, but we let the local communities, we try and allow them to come in and use it too. And yet, most of these the rebel groups, they'll change out of their uniforms in the evenings or when they're not on duty, and I mean, if they walk up to our water stand, they're welcome to a drink because we can't do anything about that. So so for us, no, it's not an issue. More broadly speaking, is it an issue? It's not so much in Congo because the food is often something that gets diverted in to support the military, but the food is very visibly it's very visibly distributed inside the camps themselves, and the camps are not heavily militarized as they were after the genocide. The camps are mostly in government-controlled areas where people have fled out of the rebel-controlled areas. So, as I say, it's not like the camps are run by the rebel movements, which you see in some conflicts, and therefore the whole hierarchy of the camp is militarily controlled or throughout with the rebel movements, and therefore who gets what aid and what goes off to the military is very hard for the international community to see and really figure it out or prevent, but it happens a lot. But it's not so much of an issue here.
It's interesting that you spent time in Bosnia. I'd like to ask you a question. When Bosnia blew up, after a while, the world got involved, and we still have a couple of thousand NATO forces there to defeat. But Congo Congo is just one of the many countries in Africa where the industrialized world, the Western world particularly, doesn't seem to really care that much. And I was wondering if you had some observations. What's it going to take to get the African countries to receive the aid that we would deposit in Europe, for instance, as we did in Bosnia? What is it? What are the issues that you see that will allow Africa to, take the next step up, probably with the help of the industrialized world?
The past few years, we've seen a real politicization of aid. And so a lot of these countries are geopolitically insignificant. And so we ignore them. And our aid dollars, both the European and the American dollars, more and more go to places where we feel we have a vested interest. And while all our cell phones are dependent upon the culture continuing to come out of here, it does come out. And so it's okay, because it's getting to the market one way or another. And it hasn't reached the conflict diamond level yet, amongst, which is a good example of how the international community really came around an issue about extractive industries, or the, what is it, IETI, the Extractive Industries Transparency. I can never say this acronym. Anyone know? The Extractive Industries Transparency Agreement, which is an effort to get governments to say how much they're being paid by the oil companies and what they're doing with their oil money. And you look at Nigeria, which is, we know, pumping billions and billions of dollars of oil, but we all know where it's going, too. It's not going into water and roads and infrastructure. So there are some international initiatives like that which haven't come to these countries yet, because they're still not geopolitically significant enough. Liberia was, because it was started by America, more or less, and so we have a long-standing tie to there. Nigeria, and anybody producing oil is certainly geopolitically significant to us. But these countries, CAR is another one where I go and I work, and we have a program, and we just won $1.5 million, and that's just huge. That's a lot of money, because the needs are not less, but there's just no donor money. So we think that's a huge program now because of that. So I think that the way forward is to recognize that Africa, or every country's growth and stability, is in our best interests. And we can't limit that statement to the ones where we can directly tie our own economic interests. So I think that, from my perspective, Africa's stability and growth is important to all of us, from just a human development perspective. But also, you look at these conflicts, and this one has the ability to draw back in Uganda and Rwanda. Angola's now got troops on the ground. So these things can swamp whole regions. And yet, the more practical answer is that, are we going to put American or European troops on the ground here and do something about this? I don't think so. I don't think we're going to have the political and military will to do that. And there have been other accounts of Sierra Leone where I don't know all the details, but the British basically sent in 100 well-trained people who kind of defused the entire situation. And so, we've got however many in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, it wouldn't take many Marines to fix this, so to speak. But I don't think we're going to put any in. And again, whether you think the military route would be the right one to go or not, increased diplomatic pressure has proven ineffective so far, but yet eventually in the long run, especially if you got the Rwandans and the Ugandans on board with a unified diplomatic front, which we don't yet have, largely, again, because of the result of the genocide. And I think the moral imperative to actually bring these people to justice, but how 14 years later it's proven impossible to do. And that's until that happens, I don't see this kind of going away. Because Rwanda rightly will say, what are we going to do? Just let them go? Forget about it? And that's not the right approach either. But as I say, this is still going on largely because of that. So. We do have a program in Zimbabwe, and It's a lot of basic infrastructure, potable water, seeds and tools right now because the government is not allowing us to do anything more. There's very little freedom to operate in any way, shape, or form other than that basic provision of daily goods and services. So we've been there, and we anticipate having more opportunities to do civil society programming, education, if and when there's the opportunity. But right now, and now we're being heavily impacted. At one point, we were shut down before the elections. We were told not to do anything. At another point, we kind of felt like our aid was being politicized and that we were being, forced into communities and with a certain beneficiary population that was politically one-sided, and we were conscious of that danger. But now, even for us, we can't get cash either. Inflation's 230 million % a year. So if we wanted to dig a well, or rebuild a school or something, the cash flow it's really hard to even operate because of that. And you read about it, how people can't afford, it takes a bucket of money to buy a loaf of bread, but it costs us that too. So, we have some foreign currency special privileges, but in the end, just the managing of the finances in that place right now is very difficult to manage for us. So.
Alluding to problems, you have these target beneficiaries and then people in the community that are in the IDP camps. There are tensions that arise. So I'm just curious if you can give an example of the kind of tension that comes up and how you guys deal with that. Another sort of area of tension I'm curious if it happens, maybe not here, but in other places where Mercy Corps is operating and you've got other development efforts by other organizations and you're not on the same page. There's disagreement and how, just an example of how that comes up and how that gets resolved.
On the first, the issue of land, access to land and land tenure is the big one. We've got one of the camps, which I showed you pictures of. It needs to expand, but there's nowhere to go. And part of that is because it would go right into the agricultural fields of the local community. And so there is land, but it's being used for agricultural purposes by the local community. So should we say that there's a humanitarian imperative in creating additional room for people to have a hut trumps the need for the local community to continue using that as agricultural land? Or do we say these people that have been displaced will have to go to another camp somewhere else and find another place to live because the local community, it's their land and they need to grow food for themselves? So, each side has an argument as to the dire nature of their situation that says, I can't give you my agricultural land, but the other side says, well, where am I supposed to even spend tonight? Where am I supposed to sleep tonight? If I can't sleep on that land next to this camp where 1,000 of us just arrived that have been displaced today. So that's one issue. And as I saw, the people pounding cassava, that wasn't their cassava. They stole it from somebody. So that's most often where you get that. But then the reverse, as I mentioned, they see the refugees and the displaced people getting, the World Food Program truck pulls up and off they unload all the beans and oil and flour, and that must be a nice way to get fed. How lucky. Those are a lot of the tensions that occur, and it's very hard to mitigate those. NGOs don't often get directly involved in that. That's UNHCR, because it really has to be the government, especially and that's one thing about this, where these are displaced people. So under international law, they're just regular Congolese, and it's the government who should resolve all of these land dispute issues. When you have a refugee population, then international law kicks in, and they have refugee status, and most governments, including Congo, are signatories to certain international agreements which provide the refugees explicit rights and access to services. So when the Rwandan genocide happened and all the refugees came over, these sites were used by those same refugees 15 years ago, 14 years ago. But there was a different set of, there was a very different legal underpinning for what was going on there, which provides different rules and regulations for some of those access to land and ability to solve disputes between the local population and the displaced population. But right now, a lot of these people have been displaced maybe only 10 kilometers, and so they're still under the same administrative jurisdiction. And so it's like, talk to the mayor. Don't talk to me. He's your mayor, and we would like to help, but again, you're both Congolese groups of people here. You have to talk to your government, which comes back to the whole problem around governance. And the second one?
The second one was just if you're working with other
organizations.
Right. Not so you compete, but how you...
I'm trying to think of a good example of where... well, one of the issues we face... Here
it sounds like you're a niche.
Well, I'll point out a conflict right even in here, because MONUC, the United Nations, is not a peacekeeping force. It is not a neutral force. Its mandate from the Security Council is to support the government of Congo, because it's a democratically elected government, and we believe in the territorial integrity of Congo. So the United Nations is supporting the government. But for us as neutral humanitarian actors, for Mercy Corps, that means they're one of the parties in the conflict. And so for us to be seen collaborating with MONUC could put us in danger when we go into rebel territory, where we often go and where we also provide services and where we also want to help the people that are being displaced or that have stayed in their homes and have fewer access to services. So if Mercy Corps is identified with the United Nations, and so we have taken the position that we do not use United Nations security escort convoys. We will talk to them to get certain information about whether a road is safe or not, just as we would the mayor or anybody who might know what's going on 10 kilometers up the road. But we keep them at arm's length. Other organizations have made the decision that no, they're good. They can provide security escorts. That'll give us the ability to access places that we might not otherwise. So there's an example of how some organizations have chosen to see MONUC as a helpful, friendly force, and many of us have chosen to see them, not because we don't like them per se, but because we need to maintain our neutrality. And if we're a party to or working with one of the combatants, basically, it's a little different with the government, because they, that we do work with the government too. We don't consider them one of the combatants, but with the United Nations, we do. We keep our neutrality by not working directly with them. That's MONUC, the military, not obviously UNHCR and UNICEF and WHO. So.
Any other final questions?
Yeah.
In terms of sustainability, do your water pumps require the operation of Mercy Corps personnel, or is it you can teach the people at these camps how to operate that?
Well, it's really not set up that way, because what you didn't see was that pumping station is not near the camps. So it has to be trucked anywhere from 10 to 50 kilometers. And we have other places where we get water, and then it has to be trucked in. So in the camp, it's merely filling the bladder, the yellow water bladder. So we do have to remain involved, both because, we have trained the local people there to do the chlorination and to maintain it, the pumps and everything, but we still have to pay for the trucking and run all the trucking and provide fuel for the pumps and things like that. So it's not ever going to be sustainable because it's too costly. Even if you said once the crisis is over, could we leave that infrastructure there and expect the local population to maintain it and pay for the diesel to continue running that pump, I would be doubtful that would happen. We would be happy to let that happen, but in the end, it's going to break once, and they might like to repair it, but will they have the funds to pay $100, $200 to repair it, or $500 to buy a new pump? Will they be able to pay the diesel to run it on a daily basis, and the chlorine inputs? Will they be able to get it and find it? So there's not a lot of sustainability built into this. This is, again, kind of the humanitarian imperative. There are actually another program about another 100 kilometers up the road. We are doing sustainable water, provision of sustainable water, and there we are creating a gravity-fed system that the community will be able to maintain. So we're looking for that always, but in the case where you've got 100,000 people, we're providing water to 80,000 every day, and sustainability just kind of slips down the priority list. So.
I think we'll call it there, right, at 1:30. It's perfect.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Let's thank Phil for